Hey guys, tonight we're walking barefoot across the chill of a stone floor. Past flickering candles and rows of silent figures wrapped in rough wool robes. You don't know where to step, because the whole monastery seems to hum with still. If the very walls have memorized the Psalms. And then you notice it. These monks, they're sleeping. Or at least, something like it. But not a single one is lying down. Instead, they're seated, backs upright, heads slightly bowed, as though caught mid-thought. You try not to make a sound as your sandals slide over the flagstones. A creaking bench echoes like a thunderclap. You've entered a world where comfort is suspect and stillness is sacred. Welcome to a kind of bedtime you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of the world reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells like melted wax, old parchment, and damp stone. You duck beneath an archway, brushing a hand against the wall to steady yourself. It's colder than you expect, like touching a ghost that hasn't warmed in centuries. The monks glide past you, one by one, heads down, hands folded, their footsteps nearly silent on the ancient floor. No one speaks. You half expect someone to tell you what to do, but no command comes. You're meant to observe, meant to feel it in your bones. The way silence fills a space so deeply that it becomes louder than noise. It's sunset, but not relax and kick off your shoes. Sunset. This one's sharper, edged in blue and gray. A warning that cold is on its way. The bells have rung for vespers. The final prayer before the long stillness of the night begins. Except here, night doesn't mean rest. Not really. You shuffle along behind the last row of monks and find a place at the edge of the chapel. No pews, just long, hard wooden stalls lining the walls, each with a low carved shelf, barely enough to lean against. A misericord they call it, but you don't know that yet. You just know your back is already arguing with your legs about whose turn it is to ache. You watch them settle in. Not a single body reclines. No pillows, no stretch. Just upright, still, and absolutely uncomforted. One monk older than anyone has a right to lowers himself into his seat like he's folding into himself. His eyes close, hands remain crossed, and within seconds, he's not moving. Is he asleep? Meditating? Praying with his whole body? You blink once, twice, and realize everyone else has done the same. 30 monks, still as statues, drifting somewhere between worlds. That's when it hits you. This isn't a quirk. This is a rule. In monasteries, like this, especially those following the rule of Saint Benedict, everything about life is regimented. Time is not your own. Day and night are broken into divine hours, marked by bells, and nighttime. That's not for slumber. That's for vigilance. For prayer. For holding back the demons that sneak in after sundown. Lying down to sleep too long, too deeply, was seen as indulgent, even dangerous. Comfort could lead to complacency. Complacency could open the door to sin. So, best not to get too cozy. But it wasn't just about morals. There's something else. Something almost practical in its absurdity. Monks had to wake up multiple times throughout the night. Every few hours. More chanting. More prayers. More walking in line through freezing corridors, with nothing but a candle and faith to keep you warm. So, instead of fully lying down and entering the deep valleys of REM sleep where dreams roam and bodies go limp, they simply stayed seated. Sleep came in shallow sips, not gulps. You might drift off, but you'd never fall, both figuratively and, more importantly, literally. Some modern scholars argue whether monks genuinely slept in these positions, or merely rested their eyes between prayers. It's possible that they entered a kind of semi-conscious state, sleep, or even microsleep, spread out over the course of the night. Others think they trained their bodies to accept this as enough. But one thing's for sure. Lying flat in a bed, as you know it, was seen as suspicious at best and spiritually risky at worst. You shift your weight a bit, and realize your legs have started tingling. The floor feels like it's radiating cold, right? through the soles of your feet, as if the stones are feeding on your body heat. A monk near you opens one eye and glances in your direction, not in irritation, but in gentle amusement, like he remembers what it felt like the first time you try to copy the posture of the others. Straight back, chin slightly down, hands over chest or tucked in sleeves. You close your eyes, and ... Nope. The instant you start to relax, your head jerks forward, neck crick. Your body wants to lie down. It craves the horizontal. But here, that's not the goal. Stillness is uprightness, and the ever-present awareness that this life is not about comfort, but about surrender. You watch the candles sputter in the corners of the chapel, their flames stretching like sleepy dancers. The light hits the old stone in strange, uneven ways, casting long shadows from monkish silhouettes frozen in half-sleep. The effect is oddly hypnotic, peaceful, even beautiful. And yet, as your eyes start to droop again, you remember you'll be up in 2 hours for matins, or lauds, or maybe it's prime. The schedule's a bit of a blur. You're not sure how anyone keeps track. You suspect the monks don't even need to think about it anymore. Their bodies just know. You're still awake, aren't you? Of course you are. Because here, sleep doesn't come the way you're used to. It's not the kind that starts with fluffing a pillow and setting your alarm for 7 hours later. No, in this world, sleep has to earn its place wedged in between prayer bells, fasts, and the heavy silence of centuries-old stone. So you sit a little straighter, trying not to shift too much on the edge of your assigned stall. The cold from the floor is slowly making its way up your legs, and you begin to understand why monks never needed coffee. Who needs caffeine when your entire sleep schedule is a carefully curated lesson in humility? The bell doesn't ring again, yet, but your thoughts are already wandering toward the question that keeps buzzing in the back of your mind. Why would anyone choose this life of silence, discomfort, and let's be honest, very questionable sleeping arrangements? The short answer: a vow. A very specific vow, crafted by a very specific man, that changed everything. It begins, like so many of history's inconvenient habits, with Saint Benedict of Nursia, 6th century Italy. The Roman Empire has officially crumbled into polite disarray. The roads are full of bandits, and chaos hangs in the air like damp laundry. Enter Benedict, a noble-born Roman who gets fed up with corruption and decides that the best way to fix the world is to leave it behind. So he retreats into a cave. Yes, literally, a cave, for 3 years. And when he emerges, he's got a vision, a structured, disciplined, and deeply prayerful life away from the distractions of society. A life where you do not get a mattress, or, personal freedom. This vision eventually takes the form of the Rule of Saint Benedict, written around 516 CE, and it becomes the foundational document for Western monasticism. Think of it as the IKEA manual for monk life, but without the tiny Allen wrench, and with much more self-denial. This rule outlines everything: when to pray, when to work, when to eat, how many pairs of shoes you're allowed to own, spoiler, not many, and yes, how to sleep. It's not casual about sleep. In fact, sleep is treated almost like a suspicious visitor that should only be entertained under strict supervision. You might expect a spiritual rulebook to say something sweet and wholesome like rest well so you can serve better, but no. Benedict says the brothers must sleep clothed, with belts fastened, ready to rise immediately at the signal. Beds should be simple and communal. No fluff, no private rooms, no shutting the door and disappearing into your dreams. You're not here for dreams. You're here for discipline. And so, the monk's night becomes an echo chamber of wakefulness, broken into segments, chopped by bells, designed never to get too cozy. The point is not just to limit comfort. The point is to rewire your whole relationship to the body. You don't belong to sleep anymore. You belong to the rhythm of the rule. There's something oddly beautiful in that, if you can manage to stop shivering. You glance down the row of monks and wonder how many of them still wrestle with the urge to lie down. Or, if like a callus grown over time, their desire for softness has simply disappeared. Because you're still adjusting, and your body keeps trying to betray you're wanting to lean, to sprawl, to slump like the modern mortal you are. But let's not pretend everyone handled it gracefully. Even in the earliest monasteries, not all Monks were exactly thrilled by the vow of discomfort. There are letters from abbots and bishops complaining about brothers sneaking naps in corners, or laying down when they thought no one was watching. One enterprising monk allegedly stuffed straw into his robes for padding, and was publicly shamed when it rustled during lauds. The nerve. Yet despite these sleepy acts of rebellion, the vow remained. It wasn't just about rules. It was about identity. To be a monk was to rise above the needs of the flesh, and nothing symbolized that like refusing to lie down. It's worth remembering that for most of history, sleep wasn't the 8-hour luxury we pretend it's always been. In pre-industrial Europe, people often slept in 2 phases, first sleep and second sleep, with a few hours of wakefulness in between. Monks didn't invent segmented sleep, they just turned it into an art form, a spiritual workout, an endurance test for the soul. But Benedict's rule wasn't universally enforced with equal strictness. Some monasteries softened with time, adding mats, straw-filled sacks, or even wooden bunks. Others doubled down. In the most ascetic orders, like the Cistercians or the Carthusians, personal comfort was seen as outright weakness. Their dormitories often had no heat, even in winter. Monks might wear gloves made from stitched-together rags and sleep with their hoods pulled low over their eyes. If you were lucky, you got a wooden pillow. If not, you used your arm and the sleeping upright. Well, that depended on the order. Some used the misericords, those small wooden ledges and choir stalls, to support their behinds during long vigils. But in the dormitory, the idea was to sleep in such a light, alert posture that you'd spring up the moment the bell rang. Beds encouraged slouching. Slouching encouraged snoozing. Snoozing encouraged, well, sign. Or at the very least, missing your appointed psalm. And no one wanted that. Written in the monastery ledger, historians still argue whether the strictest monasteries actually enforced upright sleep, or if that detail has been romanticized by later writers. Some records suggest monks did, eventually, lie down in bare planks or thin straw mats, but only for a few hours at a time. Others describe night choirs, where brothers dozed upright in their stalls between verses. It's possible. The truth is somewhere in the middle, a flexible rule, interpreted to match the climate, the era, or the tolerance level of the abbot. And let's not forget the unspoken hierarchy of holiness. Some monks were revered for their ability to go without sleep almost entirely. Stories were passed down of brothers who never lay down, who kept vigil every night for decades, who saw visions in their fatigue. Did they? Or were they just really, really stubborn? Hard to say. But in a world where being sleepy could be interpreted as being spiritually weak, staying upright became a kind of badge. Back in your own monastery stall, you shift again, trying not to wince as your spine protests. A monk coughs gently somewhere in the dark. Another clears his throat in a whisper. You imagine them decades deep into this rhythm, trained by bells, shaped by habit, hollowed out by obedience. You wonder if they ever missed the feel of soft linen, a real pillow, a room of their own, probably. But here, desire is not the thing you feed. It's the thing you fast from. The candle near your elbow is burning low now, casting just enough glow to catch the polished edges of the misericords. You didn't even realize how intricately they were carved. Tiny faces, animals, vines. Even jokes. One seems to show a man chasing a goose with a spoon. Humor here. Yes, even here. A reminder that even in the strictest places, the human spirit leaves its mark. You close your eyes, upright, and exhale slowly. It's not exactly sleep, but it's something. The bell will ring soon. You'll stand, chant, return, and do it all again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get better at it. The bell pierces the silence, like a thread drawn through cloth sharp. High, inevitably, and before your eyes even adjust to the sudden shift, the monks are moving again, not rushing, never rushing, but rising with the same rehearsed grace you saw earlier, and you, still upright, barely rested. Follow the rustle of woolen robes and creaking floorboards down another dark corridor, lit only by stubby candles pressed into iron brackets along the walls. Their flames fluttering with each quiet footfall, each turn a winding echo of stone and breath and time, and it's here, as you shuffle along with these quiet figures, that you begin to truly understand the architecture of sleep in a monastery. Not just the physical spaces, but the scaffolding of hours themselves. Carefully divided into the canonical hours that Saint Benedict mapped out like spiritual road signs. Matins in the middle of the night. Lauds before dawn, prime at the first light, followed by terce, sext, none, vespers, and finally compline, each with its own chant, its own psalm, its own task for the soul. And you think of your own life with its chaotic blurring of time, late-night scrolling and alarm, and wonder what it must feel like to surrender completely to this bell-chimed rhythm, where even sleep bends to the demands of the divine. And as the monks settle back into their stalls in the choir for matins, their eyes still heavy, but their voices already beginning to rise in measured cadence, you catch the scent of beeswax in breath, and something faintly herbal lavender, maybe, or dried sage tucked into robes, as a quiet kindness against the chill end for the next hour. They chant psalms in Latin, words you don't understand, but feel nonetheless. And it's not about comprehension, you realize, but about surrender. About letting the repetition become a blanket, the voices, a kind of lullaby in reverse. Meant not to send you to sleep, but to keep you lightly tethered to wakefulness. A state between states where consciousness is a flickering candle that never quite goes out. And the strange thing is, you begin to adjust. Your body learning to rest without reclining, to drift without falling. And as the chanting swells and then recedes like the tide, you imagine these monks doing this every single night of their lives, rising from near sleep not with complaints, but with calm. Their bodies trained like old trees to bend but not break under the weight of fatigue and purpose. And it's here you begin to grasp the logic of broken sleep. How the night is sliced into devotional moments, small wakeful islands floating in a sea of disciplined stillness, and you recall reading once that in the medieval world, nighttime was not seen as a single stretch of unconsciousness, but as a landscape with multiple plateaus: first sleep, waking prayers, second sleep, and in monasteries, this rhythm was formalized, elevated, spiritualized into a ritual that left no room for the kind of deep, dream-heavy slumber you're used to. And as you feel your eyes begin to close again, even while upright, even in this cold and echoing hall, you marvel at how the body adapts, how even you, a modern creature with a mattress memory phoned into your spine, can begin to feel rest sneak in through narrow cracks between chants. And yet part of you wonders what this does to the mind over time. Whether such fractured nights lead to deeper insights, or just deeper exhaustion, and historians still argue about this, some suggesting that this segmented sleep matched natural circadian rhythms more closely than our modern blocky schedules, while others believe it was a practical necessity, dressed up as piety, a way to keep monks from having the time or energy to stray too far from virtue or into temptation. And the irony is, in giving up deep sleep, they might have achieved a kind of waking dream, a half-conscious vigilance that blurred the line between earthly routine and divine watchfulness. And even now, in this dim moment between prayers, you find your thoughts drifting not to your bed or your phone or your inbox, but to the candlelight reflected on the polished wood, the way the wax curls at the edges like dried petals, the way the silence between chants is almost louder than the chants themselves. And you wonder if this is what the rule intended all along. Not sleep deprivation, but sacred, quiet, not punishment, but peace that comes only when the body is too tired to resist it. When the ego softens into something less sharp, less self-absorbed, and more receptive to whatever thin whisper might be waiting in the stillness. And as the final verse of Matins fades into the long, humming pause before lauds, you watch one of the older monks lean ever so slightly forward, just enough for his chin to touch the rough fabric of his robe, his hands still clasped, his body perfectly upright. And you think, this is sleep too, in its own strange way, not the kind you know, not the soft surrender of pillows and blankets, but the disciplined drift of a man who has trained his soul to rest in the palm of duty. And maybe that's the secret. It's not that these monks reject sleep, but that they've redefined it entirely, turning it from indulgence into offering, from escape into watchful waiting, from soft luxury into a spiritual posture. And as the bell rings again, not jarring this time, but expected, welcomed even, you rise with the others, moving through the corridor once more, your breath a quiet cloud, your spine a little straighter, your heartbeat beginning to mirror the rhythm of the bells, the chants, and the slow, unfolding night. You shuffle into the dim dormitory again, that same icy floor greeting your feet like an old, unkind friend. And though you long to collapse somewhere anywhere with the heaviness that's building behind your eyes, you know that collapse isn't allowed here. Not really. Not in the way you're used to. Because sleep, if it comes at all, must come upright. And you're starting to understand that this strange arrangement is less about punishment and more about precision, about intention, about drawing a hard line between surrender and self-control. And so you find your place once again in the long row of carved stalls, each one no more comfortable than the last, each misericord jutting from the wall like a forgotten shelf, barely large enough to support the curve of your thighs if you sit just right. And again you mimic the posture of the other's back straight, chin lowered, arms folded into your sleeves like nesting bird's end, though you tell yourself, this is impossible, that no human could actually sleep like this. You see the proof, sitting all around you. The slow rise and fall of chests, the half-closed eyes that no longer resist gravity, the quiet exhalations that turn the cold air into faint mist. And now it's time to reckon with the real mystery. The one you've been circling all night. Why upright? Why this peculiar, stubborn refusal to lie down, when even the poorest peasants and most ascetic hermits found a patch of earth on which to stretch their limbs? And the answer, maddeningly, is as layered as the robes these monks wear, part spiritual, part practical, and part, well, no one quite agrees, because while the rule of Saint Benedict calls for modest, communal sleeping arrangements, it doesn't explicitly ban lying down, and yet here you are, surrounded by those who've taken it one step further, as if humility and denial must be pursued past the point of clarity. And historians still argue whether this practice of sleeping upright was truly widespread, or more of a selective eccentricity practiced by only the strictest orders, with some pointing to evidence from Carthusian and Cistercian houses, where monks reportedly sat upright through entire nights, leaning on misericords between prayer intervals, while others suggest this image is exaggerated, a romanticized ideal of devotion rather than a universally enforced norm. And yet, in this moment, sitting stiffly while your spine quietly protests, it's hard not to believe it was real, because the architecture supports it, the culture enshrines it, and the very way these monks breathe seems tailored to a life lived without ever fully resting. And that's the thing, isn't it? This isn't just about sleep posture. It's about control, about spiritual mastery over the body, about disciplining not just the appetite or the tongue, but even that most basic of human impulses, the urge to lie down and rest, to curl up and forget. And the idea was simple: if you could deny yourself comfort here, in this most private, most vulnerable of acts, then you could deny yourself anything, and perhaps even grow closer to God through that denial. Because in a world that viewed comfort with suspicion, to embrace discomfort was to embrace sanctity, and it wasn't just symbolic, it was physiological. True upright sleep is lighter, shallower, never tipping into full REM, and that meant dreams were rarer, or at least less vivid. And dreams themselves were dangerous territory, seen as the playground of demons, of temptation, of false visions, so staying half awake was a way to guard the mind as well as the soul. And it wasn't only the Christians who thought this way. Remember, the Buddhist monks we'll meet later, seated in meditation through the night, striving for stillness so profound it swallowed even the instinct to drift. But for now, here in this medieval monastery, the point isn't to mimic death by lying still, but to resist it by staying propped, perched, poised like a sentry at the edge of wakefulness. And yet, despite the austerity, despite the aching stiffness, and the flickering torchlight casting long shadows against the plaster walls, there is a kind of peace here, a steadiness, a rhythm that slows your racing thoughts and begins to replace the restless drumbeat of modern life with something quieter, gentler, almost hypnotic. And you start to wonder if the very act of resisting comfort has become its own comfort for these men. A strange serenity born from repetition and obedience. Because when your world is so completely shaped by rules, when your every movement is choreographed by bells and prayers and centuries-old rituals, there's a freedom in not needing to decide anything, not even how to sleep. And for a moment, as your head tips forward and your breath deepens, You feel yourself on the cusp of something, not quite sleep, not quite prayer, but a strange in-between state where the cold no longer bothers you, and the ache in your hips fades into a dull warmth, and the chants still echo in your mind like lullabies made of stone and wind, and this, you realize, might be the goal, all along, to live in that in-between, to exist on the threshold of wakefulness, vigilant and subdued, a body that never quite forgets it has a soul to guard. And so, you let yourself drift, just a little, not down but inward. Not out of awareness, but into a softer version of it, and though your eyes close, your spine remains erect, your hands still folded, your body still obedient to the posture, and, for once, this strange new way of being doesn't feel foreign, it feels intentional, ancient, sacred, in a way you can't explain, like becoming part of something so old it no longer needs explanation, only participation, and so you sit upright, quiet, and slowly surrender to the most unusual rest you've ever known. The night stretches on like a piece of parchment, left out too long in the cold dry. Quiet, brittle at the edges and, though you've now made it through several of the canonical hours, with bells tolling softly like a voice calling through fog, you haven't yet truly slept. At least not in the way you once understood sleep. Because lying down is still forbidden, and warmth is scarce, and comfort has become a ghost that wanders just out of reach. But your body is stubborn. Slowly adapting vessel, begins to play tricks on itself, nodding forward, then jerking upright. Letting your eyes close just long enough to forget the burn in them, before they snap back open to the chill of the monastery air, and the sight of unmoving brothers beside you, who sit like statues, prayer beads curled in their hands, or tucked into sleeves, their breath quiet, controlled, disciplined to the point of invisibility. And now you notice a detail you hadn't before, those small wooden ledges beneath each monk's stall. Barely noticeable, unless you're truly looking. Carved into the underside of the seats, with intricate care. Not decorative, but functional, a kind of secret kindness, built into the coldness of monastic life, because when monks stand for long hours during the divine office, or when they sit upright and vigil through the night, these little ledges provide the tiniest bit of hidden support, a sliver of relief from the relentless pull of gravity, and it strikes you as oddly human, even gentle, that this severity has its loopholes, this rigor its concessions, that even in the pursuit of spiritual perfection, there remains space for carved wood to cradle weary thighs for a moment, and the misericord itself becomes a metaphor, doesn't it? A hidden mercy tucked into a life defined by visible hardship, and as your eyes scan the details in the wood, you begin to see what centuries of kneeling and silence might have obscured. Here a monkey playing a lute, there a dragon wrapped around a vine, a face with its tongue sticking out, a bishop chasing a goose. And the carvings are so whimsical, so odd, so utterly unlike the austere surroundings, that you feel a bubble of quiet laughter rise in your chest, which you quickly stifle out of reverence, but not without noticing that some of these monks may have once stifled similar chuckles, because though their lives were ordered and strict, they were still human. Still possessed of humor and wit, and the desire to leave behind something that spoke not just of doctrine but of personality. And now, centuries later, their private jokes are still here beneath the very seats where countless monks have sat with straight backs and heavy eyes, and it adds a strange warmth to the room, this secret gallery of carved mischief, as though reminding you that holiness doesn't always have to wear a scowl, that even among those who denied themselves the simplest pleasures including a bed, there remained a spark of playful spirit. And you imagine the carvers, laymen perhaps, or even monks themselves, hunched over their tools by candlelight, chiseling into oak or elm or walnut with steady hands and soft grins, knowing that their work would be felt more than seen, and yet caring enough to add a snout here, a claw there, a tiny snail peeking from a leaf. And you think about how these misericords, while physically small, symbolized something much larger, the permission to rest, just barely, just enough, without breaking the vow. And perhaps that's what all of this has been teaching you, that the sacred doesn't always live in denial, but in balance, in the careful dance between refusal and relief, between rule and compassion. And as you lean forward slightly, feeling the mercy of the wood beneath you, you marvel at how the human body adjusts, how even yours has begun to find its own strange rhythm in this world of stillness and silence. How your shoulders no longer ache quite so much, and your back no longer screams at every breath. And your mind, usually such a busy and unruly thing, has softened into something quieter, less urgent. Like a candle burned halfway down, flickering, but not afraid, and you wonder how long it would take for this way of being to feel natural. Whether a week would do it, or a month, or if, perhaps, like the misericords themselves, it would take years of sitting, and rising, and chanting, and freezing, and sitting again, until the posture became the person, and the stillness became the soul. And somewhere in the dark, the bell rings again, not loudly, but firmly, and the monks begin to move, rising from their stalls like shadows uncoiling from the walls. And you follow, feet numb, arms folded, heart oddly still, and you're beginning to forget what day it is, what hour, what moment, because time here is not linear, not divided the way you knew it to be, but rather measured in intervals of prayer and silence and upright sleep and the small acts of mercy carved into old wood. And as you file down the corridor toward the refectory, not for a feast, but for a bowl of thin gruel or a piece of dry bread, you find yourself wondering if these tiny discomforts aren't the point but the path, if perhaps by stripping life of excess, what remains becomes more vivid, more honest, more strange and sacred and steady. And you imagine returning to your world, to your mattress and your phone and your schedules, and realizing that something inside you has shifted, that you no longer chase rest the way you did, but meet it where it lives, in upright stillness, in whispered chants, in the quiet humor of a carved goose hidden beneath a monk's seat. By now the cold has nested deep in your bones like a cat curled under a staircase. Not aggressive, but settled, unavoidable, and oddly noble. And as you walk the stone corridor with the other monks, their feet silent against the floor, their faces blank and eyes lowered, you sense that even the building itself is participating in this ritual. With walls that echo only what needs echoing, with windows that let in just enough light to mark time without allowing too much warmth or distraction, and the rhythm of the monastery wraps tighter around you. Its quiet insistence, becoming not just a setting, but a presence. An atmosphere so thick with discipline that even your breath starts to slow, to sync with it. And now you enter the refectory. A room that has seen so many thousands of meals that it seems to hum with a hunger long since tamed. And yet here, too, there are rules, layers of them. No talking, no lingering, no choosing your place or portion, and even the way you sit, still upright, still alert, is governed by the rhythm of the rule, because every gesture here is a thread in the wider tapestry of monastic life, and eating is no exception. So you take your wooden bowl of thin porridge, or root stew, or dry barley bread, without expression, and settle onto a hard bench. And for a few minutes, the only sounds are chewing, and spoons tapping, and the slow, rhythmic voice of a reader reciting scripture, or the life of a saint from the lectern, because every meal must nourish not only the body, but the mind, the soul. The commitment to a world where even food is consumed not for pleasure, but as necessity, ritualized and pared down to its most basic function. And it's in this strange, silent communion of chewing and listening and sitting that you start to grasp how total this lifestyle truly is. How even sleepore, the avoidance of IT, is just one strand in a larger web designed to remove distraction and personal will. And the monks, for their part, seem unaffected by the cold, or the repetition, or the blandness of the food, and you start to suspect that hunger and comfort have become echoes to them, distant and meaningless, like the muffled noises of a town you left behind decades ago. And here's where it gets interesting, because while the monastic ideal is often portrayed as one of stoic endurance, the historical reality is more nuanced, more human, and historians still argue whether these men truly lived in complete denial of all comfort, or whether, like the misericords, their daily lives were peppered with hidden allowances, subtle gestures of mercy, and yes, even acts of quiet rebellion. And one of the places this shows up most clearly is in the sleep habits. That varied from order to order, with some monasteries allowing a full 6 hours of reclining sleep on a thin straw mattress, while others, especially those in the more extreme Cistercian or Carthusian traditions, demanded shorter, segmented rests in seated postures or on bare boards with no blanket, just the thick habit and the lingering warmth of the last psalm still in your mouth. And the reasons for these differences were sometimes theological. based on interpretations of scripture, or the writings of the Desert Fathers. But just as often they were practical, shaped by geography, climate, the personality of the abbot, or the state of the monastery's endowment, and in colder climates, monks might be granted heavier robes or even heated stones to place under their cloaks at night, while in milder regions, they might sleep on woven mats directly on the floor, with nothing but their vow to keep them warm. And though sleep was rationed, it wasn't entirely forbidden, because even the strictest abbots knew that a body without rest becomes a spirit without focus. And so the ideal was not deprivation for its own sake, but balance, just enough rest to function. Never enough to indulge, and that's the key to understanding why monks often slept sitting upright, not because they wanted to suffer, but because it allowed them to slip into rest without slipping too far, to recover just enough energy to continue their prayers without surrendering to the sweet oblivion of deep sleep, which was seen not only as a temptation, but as a door through which pride, lust, or forgetfulness might enter. And in many ways, this was a kind of spiritual athleticism, a training of the soul through the rigors of the body, a refusal to let comfort become a cage. And while you eat your small portion of food in silence, you start to notice the way your own thoughts have slowed, how the absence of chatter, the structure of bells and chants and measured gestures, has begun to do something to your mind, not dulling it, exactly, but smoothing its rough edges, drawing you inward in a way that doesn't feel lonely, but suspended, as if you've entered a different kind of time, not linear, not urgent, but circular, gentle, like the steady turning of a prayer wheel, or the hands of a clock that marks hours with incense instead of numbers. And suddenly you realize how radical this all is, how completely at odds with the world you left behind, where sleep is crammed into whatever corner of the night hasn't been devoured by work or screens, where food is eaten standing up or in cars or in meetings, where silence is rare and rest even rarer. And here, however rigid, however strange, there is rest, not in the usual form, but in its skeletal, disciplined essence. And you begin to wonder if that's what the monks were reaching for all along. Not the comfort of rest, but its truth. The kind that exists beyond the blanket and the pillow and the privacy of a bed. A rest that is rooted in intention and repetition and stillness. And maybe, just maybe, sleeping upright wasn't the absurdity it first seemed, but a doorway into another way of being, one where the soul is always halfway to waking, the body never fully surrendered, and the self constantly watching itself. Not in paranoia, but in reverence. And as you wipe your bowl with the last crust of bread and return it to the stone basin, you feel your limbs move more slowly, more purposefully, like you've begun to take on the rhythm of this place. And when the bell rings again, you're already on your feet, already turning, already moving back toward the dormitory and the carved misericord and the long, slow vigil that waits on the other side of the next psalm. The dormitory welcomes you again, not with comfort, but with the strange, firm embrace of continuity, familiarity carved from repetition, where every return is less like a break and more like another breath in the endless chant that is time. And this time, as you take your place in the stall and rest again upon the quiet mercy of the misericord, you notice how much less foreign it feels, how your body no longer protests quite so loudly at the rigid uprightness, how your thoughts no longer ricochet with the same urgency inside your skull, because the rhythm has taken root in you now. The slow lullaby of bells and prayers and silence has curled itself into the corners of your awareness like steam rising from a stone basin, and even your breath seems to arrive in time with the subtle creak of another monk's movement, the soft rustle of wool against wool, the way one robe brushes the stone wall when someone turns ever so slightly in their seat. And you begin to realize that the monks aren't just enduring this posture, they've made peace with it, shaped their bodies to it, trained their muscles and their minds to yield just enough for rest without ever toppling into indulgence. And it's in this moment that you remember the ancient term for this kind of sleep, vigil, which doesn't just mean watching in the literal sense, but implies a sacred wakefulness, a chosen attentiveness that goes beyond the body and into the soul. And now the idea of lying down feels unnecessary, almost vulgar in its softness, because upright sleep has become not just a necessity here, but a virtue, a quiet testament to the idea that rest can be had without surrender, that renewal doesn't always need to come wrapped in down, feathers, or memory foam, And this was particularly important in the medieval mindset, where sleep was often associated with sin, not always, but often enough that theologians spent centuries trying to understand what happened to the soul while the body slept. Whether dreams were divine messages or demonic temptations, whether sleep itself could be too deep, too sweet, too close to death to be trusted, and in response, monks developed rituals not only to guard the soul during sleep, but to shape the very nature of sleep into something sacred, upright, watchful, measured, and of course, not all orders practiced this posture with equal intensity. Historians still debate which monasteries required strict upright rest throughout the entire night, and which allowed reclining during certain hours, but the tradition was real. And in places like the Grande Chartreuse, mother house of the Carthusian order, or the stricter Benedictine houses, monks were said to sleep sitting fully upright in stalls like these, their backs never touching a cushion, their heads often supported by hoods, or by leaning forward onto their hands, and in some cases even by rope slings or wooden supports hidden beneath robes or cloaks, all designed to keep the body in a position that allowed the soul to remain ever so slightly alert, just enough to resume prayer the moment the bell rang again. And now that same bell seems less intrusive to you, less like an interruption and more like a guiding star, something that slices time into manageable, sacred slices, something that says, you don't have to think about when, or how, or why. Just follow, and you do. You sit, you breathe. You feel your spine stretch like an old cord, unwinding. Your shoulders sink just a hair lower than before. Your eyes droop not from exhaustion, though it is there, but from a kind of internal stillness that has crept in like dawn light through an unshuttered window. And it's then that you begin to see this sleep, not as lack, but as presence. Presence in your own body, in the room, in the moment, where nothing is hidden by the luxury of unconsciousness, where even dreams, if they come at all, are wisps of candle smoke, half-formed and easily dismissed. And perhaps that's the strange reward of sleeping upright, not rest in the usual sense, but a kind of lucid surrender, a state between waking and sleeping, where the mind doesn't flee but settles, and the heart, instead of racing toward tomorrow, just listens. And somewhere deep in the wood, you hear a mouse scurry, a real one this time. Not a metaphor or imagined detail, and even that tiny sound is part of this great, quiet music, because nothing here is accidental. Not the stillness, not the cold, not the ache in your knees, or the low murmur of a monk shifting his weight hand. If you stay long enough, you begin to imagine how such a posture, repeated every night for years, decades, a lifetime, could reshape a person entirely, not just their spine or their dreams, but their whole sense of self, of time, of meaning. And as your own thoughts drift into a gentler silence, a flickering of half-thoughts and lingering chants, you wonder whether maybe this is what we've lost in our modern lives, not just the posture or the prayer, but the space, the deliberate emptiness in which something sacred might echo. And as your head bows slightly forward, held upright by the quiet strength of your own will, you feel something like reverence, not for the building or the rules, or even the monks, but for the simple, stubborn miracle of stillness, in a world that never stops moving, and in that stillness, you rest. The hours blur, or maybe they congeal. You can't quite tell anymore. What is certain is that time has lost its jagged edges, worn smooth by repetition and silence, by the soft tolling of bells and the body's slow surrender to rhythm over reason. You sit again in your stall, back straight, neck bent just enough for your chin to hover over your chest like a leaf cupped in still water. And it's in this half-waking, half-floating posture that your thoughts begin to drift, not forward or backward, but downward, sinking deeper into the roots of this practice. You imagine the earliest monks not in Europe, but in the Egyptian desert, emaciated figures cloaked in rough wool, sitting beneath the burning sun, with their backs against the sandstone of a cave, their eyes closed in vigil, not sleeping in the sense you know it, but dozing in awareness, meditating on divine mysteries, while keeping the body from slouching into indulgence. The Desert Fathers, they were called Anthony, the great Macariers, and they began this strange tradition of denying the body's needs in pursuit of spiritual clarity, sleeping upright, back against rock, or propped by staff or rope, was their rebellion against the chaos of the flesh. A way to train the soul, as one might train a wild animal, gently, with patience and repetition. Their example spread through letters and whispers across the Mediterranean, carried by pilgrims and scribes, until monastic communities formed far to the west in Gaul, in Ireland, in Italy, where the practice evolved, softened, adapted to colder climates and harder winters, but retained its core discipline, the rejection of luxury in favor of vigilance. And here you are now. Centuries later, your own back pressed to nothing, your weight balanced carefully on the misericord beneath. You, participating in the lineage of that denial. You notice the way your breath has slowed again, a quiet tide moving in and out of your chest. And for a moment you imagine yourself as one of them, not as a visitor, but as a monk, rising before the sun every morning, walking barefoot through cloisters slick with dew, copying manuscripts by candlelight, refusing warmth, refusing sleep as others know it, choosing instead to sit upright, hour after hour, not because you were forced to, but because you believed, truly believed that stillness could draw you closer to the divine. And though the world has changed around you, modern life, a ceaseless buzz of notifications, soft mattresses, midnight snacks, and sleep hygiene blogs, this place remains untouched, as if folded in parchment and tucked into some forgotten corner of time. You reach up and adjust your hood now, the wool scratchy against your ear, and as it settles over your brow, your vision narrows until only the flickering light of a nearby candle remains in view. That light, too, becomes something sacred, a tiny flame against the long night, not enough to read by, but enough to be with. You remember reading somewhere that firelight flickers at the same frequency as the human brain's theta waves, those dreamlike pulses. We enter during light sleep and deep meditation, and you wonder if the monks knew this, not with EEGs or modern jargon, but intuitively, ritually. Maybe that's why they kept candles lit during their vigils, not just for light, but for that delicate dance between wakefulness and dreaming. A way to hover in that liminal state, where the divine voice, if it comes at all, might be heard. Historians still argue about whether upright sleeping truly induced visions in monks, or whether those visions were a result of exhaustion, dehydration, or the fasting that so often accompanied the practice. Were the saints really speaking to them in the dark, or were their minds fabricating meaning from the margins of sleep? The answer, like so much of this life, remains suspended in the candle smoke, unclear and oddly comforting in its mystery. Your own eyes begin to flicker again, not quite shut, not quite open. And just as your thoughts begin to wander, wondering what hour it is now, or when you'll be allowed to rise, or whether that twitch in your shoulder is normally, you hear a monk shift beside you. The smallest sound, a knee cracking, a breath held and released, a soft cough swallowed into a sleeve. It's a reminder that you are not alone in this strange theater of stillness. Dozens of others share this ritual with you, each one silently, fighting their own battle between body and spirit, between sleep and purpose. And strangely, this shared denial starts to feel communal, even comforting. Like being part of an ancient orchestra where no one plays a note, but everyone follows the same invisible score. Together, you sit. Together, you almost sleep. And again, your mind reaches into the corners of history. You recall stories of anchorite solitary religious figures who walled themselves into tiny rooms beside churches, often for life, spending decades in prayer, contemplation, and upright rest, receiving food through small openings in the wall, seeing no one but hearing everything, their souls slowly distilling into quiet wisdom or fragile madness. Upright sleep, for them, wasn't just a choice. It was a way of survival, a slow-burning devotion that replaced time with eternity. Even kings wrote letters to anchorites, asking for advice from those who hadn't lain down in years. And then you wonder, would you last even a week? A month? Already your back aches again, the weight of your own skull pressing down like a stone, your knees stiffening beneath the layers of robe, your feet swelling inside your sandals. But strangely, you don't mind. Because now, the discomfort has become part of the prayer. A reminder that you're still alive, still present, still holding the line between dream and devotion. And as the bell rings again, signaling yet another transition in this sleepless liturgy, you don't feel dread or impatience. You rise with the others, silently, obediently, and walk once more into the cold air of the corridor, where shadows stretch like ribbons across the stone floor and candlelight continues to flicker in rhythm with your breath. You shuffle down the dim corridor once more, feet brushing stone in the practiced hush of those who have walked these same slabs countless times. And though each passage looks the same as the last bare stone, low arches, an occasional candle sputtering inside a blackened niche, your senses now catch subtleties that once blurred together. You notice how the cold doesn't bite quite so harshly anymore, how the smell of old wool and burnt tallow and faint incense has become something familiar, even soothing. The monastery has worked its way into your body, its rhythm subtly stitched into your posture, your breath, your sense of time. You don't check a watch, there is no watch, but some part of you knows the hour by the way the silence deepens, by the scent of wax and wood and the subtle fatigue pooling behind your eyes like cool water behind a dam. This, you realize, is the time of deep night. The hours that stretch between matins and lauds, interstitial space, where monks would often rest again, briefly upright and vigilant, before the next round of prayers began. And once again, you return to your stall, that narrow cradle of discomfort and discipline, and settle into it as if drawn by gravity itself. You sit, you breathe. The world slows again, and this time, your thoughts begin to wander toward one of the more curious features of medieval monastic architecture. The night stair. You passed it earlier without realizing its significance, but now it strikes you. A narrow, steep set of stone steps, leading from the dormitory to the church, worn smooth in the center by centuries of sandaled feet. This stair wasn't just a practical feature, it was part of the ritual, a passage between sleep and prayer, body and spirit, flesh and word. The act of rising from upright sleep, moving quietly down the chill stairwell, and entering the candlelit choir, was itself a kind of embodied liturgy. Historians still puzzle over whether the effort of walking these stairs multiple times a night served primarily spiritual or practical ends. Was it meant to awaken the mind, to jar the body into attentiveness, or simply to ensure regularity? Whatever the intent, you can't help but picture hundreds of monks, year after year, century after century, moving in near silence down the same stone path, their bodies instinctively navigating the turns in the dark, their robes brushing the cold walls. And it strikes you that this is one of the most persistent aspects of monastic sleep, not its denial, but its segmentation. Unlike the modern notion of one long, uninterrupted sleep, monastic rest came in fragments, 45 minutes here, another hour there, broken up by prayer, by bell, by the needs of the rule. And oddly enough, modern sleep. Researchers now propose that this kind of biphasic, or even polyphasic sleep, might be more natural than the 8-hour block we strive for today. You think about that, how the monks, in their pursuit of divine discipline, might have accidentally stumbled into something neurologically efficient. That between the chanting and the fasting and the cold, they managed to develop sleep habits that both deprived and regulated them in surprising, possibly even restorative ways. Not deep sleep, maybe, but deep rhythm. A kind of sacred jet lag, engineered into the very bones of the day. You shift again in your stall, knees numb, shoulders taut, and yet you remain upright, alert, floating in that place where the line between sleep and meditation blurs. And here, in this odd space between consciousness and devotion, your mind drifts toward the dreams of monks, those fragile, flickering experiences that came in brief doses between bells. Some monastic writers describe visions during these upright rests, conversations with saints, glimpses of heaven or hell, strange beasts or divine messages woven into the folds of their dreams. Others caution against such things, urging that dreams are unreliable, even dangerous, filled with illusions. But the debate raged for centuries. Was a dream, in upright posture, more trustworthy than one from a reclining bed? Did the very nature of posture influence the purity of vision? Scholars still debate it, citing everything from the writings of John Cassian to the later manuals of monastic reform. The question remains suspended, like a monk asleep, but still listening. And so you, too, remain suspended. Not fully asleep, not fully awake, upright, listening in the stillness. You catch the quiet creak of wood as another monk adjusts his weight, followed by silence. Then, far away, the gentle echo of a door opening, perhaps a late arriving novice, or a monk summoned for a special vigil. These sounds don't startle you. They don't even break your concentration. Instead, they settle into the quiet like new notes in an ancient chant. You realize, suddenly, that sleep isn't always a matter of unconsciousness. Here, in this posture, in this room, in this timeless routine, sleep becomes more like a cloud, something you drift into and through, never quite landing, never quite gone, and you begin to understand that maybe this was the point all along. To remain slightly uncomfortable, slightly aware, slightly apart from the softness of dreams, and, in doing so, to stay tethered to purpose, to ritual, to each other. Upright sleep isn't just about denial, it's about orientation, about turning the body into a living prayer, a spine aligned with heaven, a breath timed with bells, a posture that invites presence even in fatigue. And as your own eyes close again, heavier now, but still upright, still listening, you feel the weight of centuries settle over you, not like a burden, but like a blanket made of time. And in that warmth, that impossibly ancient rhythm, you begin to drift not downward, but inward, deeper into the stillness, deeper into the dark. And though your body aches, and your thoughts scatter like dry leaves, you remain upright, waiting, listening. The hours no longer march forward like soldiers but unfold like petals, soft and slow, each one blooming quietly into the next without fanfare. You remain seated in your narrow wooden stall, not quite sleeping, not quite awake, existing somewhere, in the gentle gray space between. A space that ancient monks once called vigil, not just a refusal to sleep, but a deliberate attention, a listening posture, a waiting that was neither impatient nor passive. And as you settle further into this strange, upright stillness, the aches in your back and legs and neck become something else entirely, not pain exactly, but a sort of disciplined dullness, like the low hum of a distant organ or the soft drone of a chant you've heard so many times it no longer means anything specific, but carries meaning anyway, like a memory without words. You shift slightly on the misericord, that tiny carved perch beneath your fold-down seat, grateful once again for its subtle mercy. Its presence, unnoticed by casual visitors, now feels like a small blessing, a nod from some long-dead craftsman who understood the need for tenderness in the midst of endurance. The candlelight in the chapel guttered once or twice earlier, and now only a few small flames remain, stretching your shadows high against the stone columns, as if even your silhouette must learn to stand tall in this place. The silence deepens with each passing breath, but it is not empty, it is full of presence, full of listening, full of the long inheritance of men who sat where you now sit, centuries ago, with the same chill in their feet, the same half-breath slipping like fog across their lips. You wonder, did they feel this same tug between surrender and alertness? This constant negotiation between body and spirit, between the craving to recline and the vow to remain upright. Historians still argue whether the practice of upright sleeping was truly enforced in every order, or exaggerated by later chroniclers trying to paint their predecessors as holier than thou. But either way, the image persists. Rows of silent monks, slumped in prayer stalls like robed statues, resting without reclining. Heads tilted forward under heavy hoods. The occasional twitch of a knee or a clearing of the throat, the only sign that life pulses beneath the cloth. And now you recall, peculiar fact, some monasteries, particularly in colder regions, or during stricter periods, employed what were called disciplinary chains, small lengths of rope that bound a monk's body in place while sleeping upright, not to punish, but to prevent the temptation of slumping sideways, of sliding from posture into indulgence. It's difficult to imagine now, but such extremes were not uncommon in the fervent centuries of monastic reform, when spiritual rigor was prized over comfort, and when the fear of sleep's seductions was enough to birth mechanical aids to asceticism. These chains weren't locked or cruel, but they served as reminders, gentle or not, that, even in sleep, one must remain aware. You wonder again, as your spine grows tired, whether such contraptions made the practice easier or harder, whether they fostered holiness or merely soreness. The deeper you slip into the tradition, the more you realize that monastic sleep was not just a schedule or a stylet, was a statement. It proclaimed that the body was not to be served, but mastered. That rest could be functional without being indulgent. And in a world where we worship 8 hours of sleep as a basic human right, the idea of someone choosing to sit half awake through the night, listening to the creak of beams and the whisper of wind through lancet windows, feels almost alien. Yet here you are, doing it too, not because you must, but because the act itself reveals something. That stillness is not the absence of motion, but the fullness of attention. Your thoughts drift briefly to a single phrase. You read once in a forgotten manuscript, "Sleep upright, so the soul may hear what the body forgets." You don't know who wrote it, but now it makes sense in a way it didn't before. Because the body forgets everything, every promise, every rule, every prayer, whispered in the heat of devotion. But the soul remembers. And when the spine is straight, the breath slow, the eyes heavy but not closed, perhaps the soul does, indeed, hear things the body never could. Somewhere far below, a door opens, then closes. A faint clatter of wood against stone. Perhaps a brother has risen early, or late. You do not look up. You remain upright, listening, and as you settle again into your own silent posture, the thought comes that perhaps sleep, as we understand it, has always been a compromise, a luxury purchased with comfort. But for the monks, it was something else. Not a reward, but a ritual. Not an escape, but a reminder. That life is short, that time is precious. That vigilance, not numbness, is the goal. You breathe in, you breathe out. The bells will ring again soon. But for now, you remain upright, still silent. The night lengthens, not by the ticking of a clock, but by the deepening of silence. A stillness, so complete it feels physical, as though the air has thickened just slightly, pressing gently against your skin like layers of wool. You sit unmoving. In your stall, the miser accord, once again your small and faithful companion. And now the edges of your discomfort have dulled to something more ancient. Something that no longer startles the body or irritates the mind. You are simply here, sitting, breathing, belonging not to the world of beds and blankets, but to this hushed realm of upright watchers. Outside the thick walls, the wind stirs among the trees, and you imagine the sound of leaves scattering like parchment across stone. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cries a single note, drawn out like a slow sighand, then nothing again. You wonder what kept the monks going, what kept them waking night after night, segmenting their rest, choosing the ache of upright sleep over the soft temptation of lying down. Surely some of them struggled. Surely there were nights when a novice's head nodded too far forward, and he had to be nudged awake. Surely there were moments when even the most devout monk thought longingly of a mattress, a quilt, a night free from bells. And yet, they remained. Generation after generation, century after century. They built their lives around it. They made rules for it, rituals around it, and even architecture to support it, like the misericords you now lean on, carved by hands that understood the limits of human will, and those carvings weren't always pious either. You recall this now with a faint smile. Some misericords, particularly in English and French abbeys, contain the most unexpected immortus monkeys playing instruments, foxes dressed as friars, men being chased by geese, hidden beneath the somber seats of monastic stalls. These tiny, often whimsical carvings seem almost subversive, like jokes whispered behind the back of solemnity. Historians still argue about their purpose. Were they acts of quiet rebellion by bored woodcarvers? Did monks secretly commission them as a kind of spiritual release valve? Or were they tolerated precisely because they remained hidden, because they offered a sliver of levity to a life otherwise carved from stone in silence? Either way, they reveal something deeply human beneath the habit. A need for humor. A flash of absurdity in a world that demanded endless reverence. And here, as you sit upright in the echoing dark, that duality feels more true than ever. That one can be serious without being joyless. That one can sleep upright, and still, perhaps, smile now and then, at the fox, in a friar's robe, carved beneath your knees. And so, despite the fatigue blossoming slowly in your joints, you stay seated. You don't fidget, don't slouch, don't seek softness. You've begun to understand that this posture is less about penance than presence. A posture that holds your attention like a tuning fork, humming just loud enough to keep your spirit awake, even as your body hovers on the edge of sleep. You picture the routines again, the bell for matins, the psalms murmured in half-light, the brief return to sleep. The bell again for lauds and how, night after night. They trained their bodies like instruments, to respond, to endure, to yield, without collapsing. Some monks would wake before the bell even sounded, not because they were alert, but because their rhythm had become instinct, like birds before dawn, like breath before thought. And here's where it becomes fascinating. Some records show that even when monks were granted reclining sleep, they often chose not to take it. Instead, they returned to their stalls, sat upright, and dozed lightly, eyes closed but heart awake. Was it stubbornness? A deeper devotion? Historians still puzzle over these choices, finding inconsistencies between the official rules and the lived realities. Some abbots were strict, others lenient. Some regions adapted the rule to local conditions. Warmer climates allowed longer rest, colder ones shortened it to conserve body heat. In Spain, a few Benedictine monasteries even permitted monks to nap outdoors during the day, leaning against cloisters, wrapped in thick habits, breathing in the scent of herbs and stone. Upright or not, these moments were still framed by intention. Rest was never taken lightly. It was always a negotiation between need and virtue. And now, you feel that negotiation in your own bones. Your spine pulses dully with the ache of long stillness. Your knees murmur beneath your robe, but still, you remain. And as your body sinks again into that fragile state between sleep and watchfulness, your mind wanders to the stories told about saints who slept upright for years. Saint Simeon Stylites, for instance, who lived atop a pillar for decades, and reportedly never lay down to sleep. Did he truly remain upright the whole time? Or was it part of the legend, the hagiography, the beautiful exaggeration that made his story shimmer across time? Whether or not it's literal, the idea of it has power. To sleep without surrender. To rest without forgetting. To keep one's face turned always, always upward. And so, you drift there too. Upright, dreaming perhaps. Or not. There is no line anymore. Only breath. Only stillness. Only the slow echo of history folding itself gently around you, like a blanket made of shadows and bells and wood smoke. The light never changes in here, not really. Even when the sky outside begins to pale. Even when the earliest fingers of dawn start to tickle the upper reaches of the chapel windows. In this space, this still, slow, stone-wrapped world, the light remains steady, dim, and eternal. And perhaps that's intentional. Perhaps that's the point. That you, seated upright in your narrow wooden stall, should lose track not just of hours, but of the very rhythm of night and day. And instead, sink deeper into the rhythm of prayer, of breath, of silence. You sit now, not as a visitor, but as a participant in this long, strange ritual. Your body folded into the curve of the misericord, like a parchment bookmark, slipping into a well-used psalter. Your spine aches. Of course it does. Your legs tingle from the strain of stillness. But these things no longer disturb you. They are part of the experience now, part of the monastic vocabulary your body has begun to learn without words. The candlelight flickers on the stone columns. You watch the flame move like a living thing, never frantic. Always slow dancing, just enough to remind you that time hasn't stopped. It's simply decided to stroll instead of sprint. You find yourself wondering how long you've been here? An hour, a night, a century. And then you remember that, in some Carthusian houses, monks didn't just pray in communal stalls, they lived much of their lives in silence. In solitude, only gathering for select prayers. For them, the idea of upright sleep wasn't just discipline, it was a way of preserving the cloister of the mind, maintaining that delicate distance between self and the world. You imagine one of them now, kneeling on a cold stone floor in a tiny hermitage. His only light a single oil lamp. His bed little more than a board against the wall. And he doesn't lie down. He doesn't curl up. He sits, hood-drawn hands, folded, and slowly, quietly, he lets the edge of sleep blur into stillness. Not because he's being watched. Not because of rules. But because, In the simplest terms, he believes it brings him closer to God. And you? Well, you're not in this for salvation, not really. You're here out of curiosity, out of fascination, maybe even out of a deep hunger for stillness in a world that rarely offers it. But the result is the same. You sit upright, breathing. There's a story you remember now, buried deep in the footnotes of some article. During the early Middle Ages, a small sect of monks in Armenia were said to sleep, seated in shallow pits carved from stone, knees drawn up, backs resting against wooden braces, as if trying to mimic the posture of the dead in burial niches, not in a morbid way but in a symbolic one, to remind themselves, nightly, that life is fleeting, that each rising from sleep is a kind of resurrection. Whether that's historical truth or pious legend, historians still debate. But you think about it now, your breath rising and falling in the quiet, and you wonder what it would feel like to wake that way, every morning, from an upright tomb. Another soft sound breaks the silence, a robe shifting, a distant door latch, then stillness again. You imagine the bells will ring soon, calling the monks to lauds the final office of the night and the first of the new day. And though you dread standing, you also find yourself anticipating the movement, as if your body, tired as it is, wants to prove it can still obey the rhythm. That the ache in your spine is not a flaw, but a sign of participation. That you, too, can endure. Your mind wanders again, and now it finds its way to the east. In Buddhist monasteries, particularly in Japan, the practice of zazen-seated meditation has parallels to this monastic upright sleep. There, monks often meditate for hours in seated positions, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow and silent. Sometimes they nod off, gently corrected by the tap of a kaisaku sticka. Physical reminder to return to the posture, to the breath, to presence. In both traditions, there is an understanding that stillness itself is transformative. That sitting, properly and with intention, can be a form of spiritual practice, of purification, of training. You marvel at the parallel. Two different worlds, two different faiths. Same posture, same silence. Perhaps upright sleep, you think, is less about sleep and more about surrender. Not the kind of surrender that collapses into softness, but the kind that leans into discomfort with purpose. That accepts the ache, the numbness, the confusion of half-waking, and simply says, I'm here. The candle beside you has burned low. Now, its wax puddled at the base, a flicker. Then darkness, and you do not move. You wait. The breath continues. The silence continues, and you continue upright, still, present. Time no longer flows in a straight line. It folds here, slowly, deliberately, like fabric being pressed into a trunk for a long journey. You don't know if you've been sitting for minutes or hours, only that you have become part of the room. Now, not merely a visitor, not even a guest, you are a piece of this strange, old ritual. And your body, once noisy with complaint, has learned a kind of obedience. The stall you sit in creaks gently beneath you, the misericord pressed against the underside of your thighs like a quiet teacher, reminding you, over and over, to stay upright, to stay aware. Sleep drapes itself over your shoulders like a shawl made of fog, not heavy enough to smother, but persistent, persuasive. You resist it without violence. You learn to ride it like a boat in shallow water, never sinking, but never fully on shore. Outside, the birds are beginning to stir. You can't hear them clearly through the thick stone, but you can feel it. Somehow, the subtle shift in the air, the change in pressure that comes with morning's approach. The world out there is waking up. But in here, inside these ancient walls, time still belongs to the monks. The bell hasn't rung yet, but you know it will. It always does. Monastic life is a symphony of bells, each one a note in the daily liturgy, and your body has begun to attune itself to those invisible cues. It's not just about waking up, it's about rising with purpose. With presence you start thinking about how different your own sleep is, at home, the bed, the pillow, the blanket wrapped around your feet, the fan humming softly in the corner, the room at just the right temperature, your phone nearby, glowing faintly. You do everything you can to make yourself comfortable, to fall asleep quickly, to stay asleep deeply, and yet, here you are. More at peace, in a cold, stone chapel, perched half asleep on a piece of medieval carpentry, than you've been in weeks. Not because this is comfortable, but because this is intentional, and you begin to understand that monks didn't sleep upright because it was efficient. They slept upright because it shaped their souls. Because each discomfort nudged them closer to clarity, to devotion, to surrender. And it wasn't just sleep, it was waking. The kind of waking that happens deep inside. When all the usual comforts have been stripped away, and you're left only with breath and wood and candle smoke. You remember something else now, a curious little story tucked into an old account of monastic habits. In one 14th century abbey, it was reported that a brother had trained himself so well to sleep upright that he could wake precisely 1 minute before the bell rang. Every night, without fail. The other monks joked that he must be in league with angels, but when asked, he only smiled and said, "The heart learns the hour, when the body no longer commands the time." Historians still debate whether this tale is fact or fable, but you find yourself believing it not because it makes logical sense, but because it feels true. After all, you're beginning to feel the same thing. A subtle knowing, a quiet internal rhythm that exists without clocks or cues. You are no longer waiting for the bell. You are becoming part of it. And that's when you notice the carvings again, the misericord beneath you. Yes, but also the ones along the sides of the stalls. You hadn't really seen them before. But now, in the faint light of dawn, you spot them clearly. A griffin curled into a ball, its wings folded like prayer hands. A man pulling a cart full of frogs. A woman reading a scroll while a squirrel peeks from her hood. Strange, whimsical things. Not sacred, not serious, and yet, they belong here. They were carved, not just to support the body, but to remind the soul that life contains more than solemnity. That even in the most disciplined spaces, there is room for absurdity. For beauty, for surprise. And isn't that what sleep is too? A kind of surprise. A place where the mind lets go, where logic dissolves, and stories bloom like wildflowers. Perhaps that's why upright sleep feels so strange. It takes that freedom and reins it in, not with cruelty, but with care. It doesn't shut the door to dreams. It just asks them to come more slowly, more softly, more reverently. The chapel feels different now. Warmer, somehow. The stillness hasn't broken, but it's begun to shift. Like the surface of a frozen lake, just before the first crack appears. And you realize this is the last moment, before the return. Before the next office. Before the rising, you draw a breath, not deep, not loud, just enough to remind yourself that you are here. You are awake, and you are not alone, because all around you, others are sitting too. Monks old and young, upright, still breathing, waiting, like candles, half melted, but still lit. You close your eyes again, not to sleep, but to listen, and somewhere, far above you, the first note of the bell begins to rise. The bell chimes softly at first, like a ripple across the surface of still water, and you feel it in your ribs before you truly hear it with your ears. It's not urgent, not loud, just a reminder, a familiar friend arriving right on time, as it always does. The air in the chapel shivers, just slightly as the sound rolls through it, brushing past stone columns and wooden beams and the tired faces of monks seated in quiet rows. You don't need to look around to know they're beginning to stir. The rustle of fabric, the small crack of joints stretching after hours of stillness. The faint scrape of wood against wood as a few measure chords lift with a whisper. These sounds, almost imperceptible, bloom gently in the space like incense drifting upward. But you remain seated, hands in your lap, posture straight but not stiff. You have no rush to stand. You are still caught in the dream of upright sleep, not quite ready to wake. And maybe that's the point. In this life, waking doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in like morning fog, not with a trumpet, but with a sigh. Even the monks, disciplined as they are, don't leap up from their stalls like soldiers. They move like reeds in a breeze, quietly, gracefully, slowly. You hear the low murmur of voices beginning to form, the early syllables of lauds, whispered by habit more than thought. The structure is returning now. The next part of the rhythm. And in that rhythm, the upright sleep fades away like breath, on glass, leaving only memory and ache behind. You reflect on how strange this all might seem to someone from the outside world. Someone who defines sleep by softness, silence by emptiness, prayer by grand gestures. But here, sleep is upright, silence is full, and prayer is simply the shape of the day. And in this place, that shape is carved as precisely as the mosaic. Under your thighs, every hour accounted for. Every gesture loaded with meaning. The monks didn't just live here. They disappeared into the rule, letting its hours consume their personal desires, their sense of time, even their sense of self. And yet, oddly, they didn't vanish. Their names might be forgotten. Alred, Brother Simplicius, Brother Peter of a Quiet Hands, but their presence lingers in every crack in the stone, in every chant still sung, in the very air you breathe. You feel them now. Not ghosts, exactly, but echoes. Men who sat where you now sit, who bent their knees in the same stalls, who slept upright with the same slow grace. It's comforting, in a way, to know that such continuity exists. That centuries can be stitched together not just by events, but by habits, by rituals, by the quiet bravery of staying still. And that bravery was not always without reward. You recall reading a rather fringe theory once, that monks who slept upright for years developed stronger circulatory systems than their lay counterparts, that their spines, while curved from age, held a certain durable tension. Whether or not that's true, historians still debate. But you like the image of it. A monk, 90 years old, his back bent like a branch in winter, but still able to rise before dawn, still able to sit through matins with his eyes half closed, still able to rest upright without surrendering to slumber completely. And not all monks were saints. That, too, is part of the truth. There were sleepers who snored during vigils, novices who leaned too far and thumped forward onto their stall rails with a thud, an abbot here or there who might have indulged in an unauthorized nap on a pile of extra choir robes. Monastic records, when read between the lines, reveal plenty of humanity. Little scribbled complaints about cold feet, dull sermons, creaky floorboards, or the brother who always seemed to fall asleep during the third psalm. These tiny irritations, whispered across parchment, remind you that upright sleep was not always done with the serenity of saints. It was sometimes endured, sometimes resented, often imperfect. And still, it was done. Because this practice wasn't about perfection, it was about rhythm. Surrendering to the rule meant accepting that you'd be tired sometimes, that your prayers would slur, that your knees would complain. But it also meant trusting that the rhythm would hold you, like water holds a leaf, that the bells would ring whether you were ready or not, that the misericord would be there beneath you whether you noticed or not, that the chapel, silent and unchanging, would receive your upright sleep with the same gravity it gave to every breath, every chant, every candle flicker. You shift slightly in your seat now, not out of discomfort, but out of readiness. Your legs are still half asleep, your back stiff, your neck stiffened into its own natural curve, but you don't mind. These small aches are part of the price, the reward. A kind of quiet intimacy with the past, with those long-vanished monks, with yourself, and the bell tolls, again. This time, fuller. A proper call. The final summons to lauds. You take a breath, and slowly, reverently, you begin to rise not just from the seat, but from the sleep that never quite came, and never quite left. You rise slowly, carefully, as if disentangling yourself from a long and intricate dream. Your legs hum with pins and needles. Your back resists, like an old door pushed open after many seasons of rest, but you don't rush the motion. The monks around you stir in unison, not choreographed exactly, but moving with the kind of natural rhythm that only comes from repetition, laid down like stone over decades. Hoods are lifted, hands fold into sleeves, and soft steps begin to echo gently across the chapel floor. The candles gutter one last time before giving way to the first true light of dawn. A pale silver bleeding in through the high windows, like breath on cold glass. The world beyond the abbey is beginning to glow. But in here, the light remains gentle, unhurried like the monks themselves. You remain quiet. Everyone does. Even the movement has a silence to it. Even the shifting of robes and the creak of Floorboards seem to honor the stillness rather than disturb it. This is not a morning like others. This is not about alarm clocks or coffee or rushing toward tasks. This is the kind of morning that has waited through centuries. And now it arrives. Not with fanfare, but with presence. Your feet are unsteady at first. They miss the firm outline of the Masera cord beneath your thighs. But with each step, they recall the rhythm of the floor. You move among the monks toward the altar, where the psalms will be sung, and the prayers will rise again into the vaulted air. And though your body is tired, aching in quiet, private ways you carry within you a kind of alertness that sleep rarely grants. Not the kind of alertness that chases productivity, but the kind that listens closely, that holds the shape of the silence in its mouth like a piece of bread. It's strange to think you haven't actually slept. Not fully, not the way most people define it. Your body was still, yes, and your mind drifted in and out of dreams, but you never laid down, never curled up, never surrendered completely to oblivion. And yet, somehow, you feel rested. Or at least, whole. Maybe because the stillness didn't come from comfort, but from decision. From choosing over and over to remain upright. From accepting the ache as part of the practice. From allowing the slow rhythm of bells and candlelight and wooden stalls to carry you across the threshold of night without asking for softness in return. And now, with your body standing and your mind gently awake, you begin to see the world around you more clearly. The faces of the monks not youthful, not energetic, but calm, weathered. Lit from within by something quieter than enthusiasm. The stained glass windows above the choir stalls, dusty and unreadable in the dark, now catching the light and revealing small stories in shards of color. A shepherd with a crooked staff. A lamb asleep in a field of blue glass. A ship caught in crimson waves. None of it demands your attention, but all of it welcomes it. You feel no urgency, no pull to analyze, interpret, solve. Just the sensation of presence, like standing in a forest and realizing the trees are listening. 2. You wonder now about how this upright sleep affected the rest of the monk's day. Surely they didn't stride through morning chores as though freshly rested. Surely some nodded off during morning readings, eyes slipping closed over Latin passages they'd memorized years ago. Historians still argue whether monastic sleep deprivation was spiritually productive or simply institutionalized fatigue. Some orders, like the Cluniacs, eventually relaxed the nighttime rules and allowed more generous rest. Others, like the Carthusians, doubled down, emphasizing silence and isolation as purifiers of the soul. Yet all these variations still shared the same core idea, that sleep wasn't just personal, it was sacred, it was political, it was ritual. And you think again of how far modern life has drifted from this idea. How often sleep is framed as a problem to solve, a luxury to squeeze in, a weakness to conquer with caffeine. And how monks, in contrast, wove sleep into the very architecture of their devotion, not by indulging it, but by shaping it, restraining it, guiding it gently, toward usefulness, toward humility, toward stillness. It wasn't about getting more done. It was about being more present. As you move toward the choir stalls for the final psalm, your knees whisper a dull complaint, but your mind is quiet, clear. The bells have stopped now. The moment has arrived. And as the monks raise their voices, in song low, slow, a kind of gentle wave washing over the stones, you let yourself lean forward slightly, not to rest, but to listen. Because that's what upright sleep teaches in the end. Not how to close your eyes, but how to open your ears. How to hear the silence behind the sound. How to remain upright, not just in body, but in heart. And now, as your voice joins, there's uncertain but sincere. You realize something has changed. You are not a visitor anymore. You are part of the rhythm. The final notes of the psalm dissolve into the high arches above you, lingering for a moment in the vaulted stillness before sinking into the stones like dew into dry earth. No one claps. No one nods or sighs or says a word. It isn't performance, it's offering just one more verse laid gently on the altar of time, like thousands before it, and thousands more still to come. You remain where you are, upright once again, though this time not asleep, and not entirely awake, either something between, the kind of inner suspension that only comes after prolonged stillness. The monks do not rush out, do not stretch, do not speak. They begin to flow quietly back into the cloister, like smoke returning to its lamp, each robe whispering against the cold floor, each face neutral, serene. You follow slowly, each footstep guided more by imitation than instruction. You pass through the passageways of the monastery, narrow and echoing. The morning light now dripping through the windows in syrupy streaks of gold and dust. The light feels generous now, not harsh. After the long vigil, even the smallest ray carries the weight of a blessing. You trail your fingers against the stone as you walk, a gentle reassurance that the world still exists, that you are still held by something solid. You can smell the faint trace of earth in the walls, of wax, of wool and wood smoke, of sleep stretched thin over centuries. Breakfast will come soon. Nothing grand, just a crust of bread, maybe a bit of cheese, something warm to drink. The monks eat in silence, of course, seated on wooden benches, beneath painted saints and faded murals. They're chewing, muffled by the ancient hush of routine. And yes, they'll be tired. There will be yawns, hidden behind sleeves. A few soft blinks, a head bowed a little too long over a bowl. But none of it breaks the atmosphere. None of it seems shameful. It's understood, accepted, even cherished. This is what devotion looks like. Not perfection, but persistence. Not energy, but endurance. You find yourself thinking now about what kind of rest really replenishes. Is it the luxury of softness, of blackout curtains and memory foam? Or is it the dignity of silence, the integrity of stillness? These monks have chosen the latter. Not to punish themselves, not to show off their suffering, but to build a life where sleep isn't an escape from the world, but a way to meet it with reverence. Upright sleep becomes a kind of sacred boundary between action and intention, between solitude and community, between flesh and spirit. And when the bell rings, it brings not only waking but transformation. You're not just someone who slept sitting up. You're someone who shared in the ancient choreography of monastic time. And there's something else to consider. The way this posture of upright sleep shaped the mind. Some monks wrote more lucidly after their vigils, their thoughts sharpened by the absence of indulgence. They saw visions in the candle smoke. Some composed poems, hymns, illuminated pages that shimmered with quiet joy. Historians still argue whether these creative bursts were fueled by inspiration or just the mild delirium of sleep deprivation. But the work endures. The beauty endures. The illuminated margins, the careful notations, the psalters worn soft by hours of breathless chant, they speak of a mind trained not just to serve, but to see. You sit now in the cloister garden, where the stone opens to sky and the sunlight spills without judgment. A few monks tend the herbs, their steps noiseless on gravel. One leans over a small wooden trough of mint and sage. Another adjusts the angle of a sundial. The world is still slow here. Not sluggish, just deliberate. Each gesture, each breath, carried out as if it matters. As if it is part of a prayer not yet spoken. And you feel it again, that same sensation from the chapel stall, that you are not watching history. You are inside it. That this garden, this morning, this tired but strangely luminous version of yourself, is a continuation of something so old and so tender that it no longer needs to announce itself. You lean your back against the warm stone of the cloister wall. You close your eyes not to fall asleep, but to remember what it felt like to sleep upright, to float just above rest, just beneath awareness. And in that moment, with the scent of herbs in the air and the sound of robed footsteps passing like wind, you realize you don't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Because here, the stillness doesn't feel like a pause, feels like a presence, like something alive. You open your eyes again. You are not dreaming. You are simply awake, in the quietest and most beautiful way. The cloister garden grows warmer now, though the air still carries the crispness of morning. Your hands, once chilled and folded tight beneath your sleeves, now relax against the grain of the stone wall behind you. Across the garden, bees drift lazily among the herbs, their wings moving in a blur that somehow matches the pace of this place. Calm but constant, steady but never still. You follow one with your eyes first to a lavender bloom, then to a cracked tile, then to the air itself, where it vanishes, as if even nature knows how to disappear softly in a monastery. You watch the monks continue their simple work, and none of it feels out of place. Not the old man bent over a watering can. Not the younger monk rubbing dirt from his sandals. Not even you, sitting there, not praying, not reading, not really anything at all land yet, belonging entirely. You're beginning to understand that here, the value of a thing is not what it produces, but how quietly it holds its shape. It makes you think, again, about the paradox of sleeping upright. How something that seems inherently uncomfortable could also be so, instructive, even nourishing. Because what you're discovering, slowly and wordlessly, is that the posture teaches you more than the sleep itself. When you sit without the promise of collapse, when you rest without surrender, your body begins to learn an ancient language, one where breath counts more than dreams, where stillness speaks louder than comfort, and your mind follows, not out of obedience, but out of recognition. As though some buried part of you has always known this rhythm. It just took a night perched on a wooden fold-down seat, surrounded by silence thick as wool, to remember. You start to wonder how many generations practiced this way, how many monks and pilgrims and scribes, how many nights were carried through, by candlelight and quiet resolve. The records tell us the names of abbots and saints, the architects and donors, but not of the Brother Thomases and Brother Hugos, who simply showed up every night and stayed awake, not with eyes, but with presence. Their stories aren't carved into stone. They're carved into posture, into the worn wood of the stalls, into the walls that softened with the breath of centuries. And still, not all upright sleep was purely monastic. In the 18th and 19th centuries, long after the medieval monasteries began to quiet down, the practice of upright resting found its way into entirely different corners of society. Sailors slept upright on ships where hammocks were too scarce. Soldiers leaned against one another in trenches. Slaves, during transport, were forced to rest while bound upright. And some, heartbreakingly, turned that horror into silent resilience. Upright sleep, once chosen, once sacred, now became survival. You realize that posture is never neutral. It always means something. It carries history in the bones, memory in the spine. And even now, in modern times, it persists. Travelers on overnight buses, nurses catching a breath between shifts, pilgrims on long journeys, parents rocking infants to sleep with eyes half closed, in a chair they never intended to sit in so long. There's something almost monastic about all of it. Not in creed, but in effort. In the decision to rest without collapsing, to find calm not by escaping, but by staying exactly where you are. Maybe we're all still trying to remember what monks knew long ago, that stillness isn't the absence of motion, but the presence of attention. You shift slightly against the stone, not to move away from the moment, but to settle deeper into it. The sun is brushing the top of the cloister wall now, casting long, sleepy shadows across the garden floor. A small group of monks pass by, one of them nodding ever so slightly in your direction, not to acknowledge you as a stranger, but as a fellow inhabitant of this shared silence. You nod back, and for a moment, the centuries fold again. You could be anywhere, anywhen. You remember the strange and lovely story of the desert. Fathers, the early Christian hermits, who lived in the Egyptian wilderness. Some of them reportedly practiced vigil sleep, a kind of half-conscious resting where the body remained seated, or even standing. The eyes half shut, the mouth silently shaping psalms. There are accounts unreliable, but persistent. Monks who remained upright, through storms, through fevers, through visions so vivid they mistook them for divine visitations. Historians still argue whether these tales are metaphor or miracle, but either way, the message remains. Sleep, for them, was never just rest. It was reverence. Not for dreams, but for discipline. Not for comfort, but for presence. The wind stirs. The mint near your feet. You inhale. And for the first time, the scent doesn't pull you back to the world, anchors you in it. Here now, you don't need to rise. You don't need to retreat. You only need to remain upright, still aware. You remain where you are, upright and unhurried. And for the first time since arriving, you realize how much your body has changed, not in structure, but in language. It no longer whispers for escape. It doesn't beg for the softness of a mattress, or the weight of a blanket, or the drone of white noise. Instead, it speaks with a strange kind of patience, a gentle hum of understanding. This, too, is rest. Not the kind that closes doors, but the kind that opens windows. The kind that asks nothing more than stillness and grants in return a clarity that no amount of comfort can deliver. You are not lounging. You are not drifting. You are balanced like a book left open on a shelf, its pages held in tension by the breath of the room itself, and it makes sense, you think now, why monks chose this, why they slept as they prayed, upright and half awake. Not to suffer, not to display holiness like a badge, but because the line between rest and wakefulness had never been a wall. For them it was a doorway, one they crossed dozens of times. A night, with each bell, each psalm, each return to their stall. The sleep itself wasn't the goal. Awareness was. The cultivation of a life so attuned to its purpose that even rest became an act of attention. The bells have long since stopped ringing this morning, but their echoes remain inside you. You can still feel them, their timing, into the rhythm of your breath. You wonder if it was always like this for them, these monks. Did their bodies eventually internalize the rule so deeply that their organs kept time with the chapel? Did their pulses quicken moments before the bell? Did their dreams adjust to the shape of the liturgical calendar? There's a passage in an obscure 13th century monastic diary where a brother writes, "I dream in thirds of the night, as the hours require." Historians still argue whether he meant that literally, his dreams occurring in sync with matins, lauds, and primor weather. He was simply noting the fragmentation of his inner life, shaped and reshaped by the calls of devotion. Either way, it tells you something powerful. That upright sleep doesn't just change the posture of the body. It rewires the dreams. It adjusts the stories your mind tells when your eyes are closed. And that makes you wonder what kind of dreams monks had in this place. Were they filled with visions, with saints and angels and choirs of golden light? Or were they simpler dreams of tending the garden, mending a sandal, hearing the bell before it rang? Maybe their dreams weren't extraordinary. Maybe they were just quiet, calm, whole. Not because the monks were free from anxiety, but because their sleep-bound, as it was by intention, left less space for the wild storms of the mind. It's not that the posture itself is magic, a straight back, a wooden seat, a misericord. These are tools, not spells. But when used nightly, faithfully, for years, they become more than furniture. They become thresholds. And now, long after your night of upright sleep has passed, you begin to understand that the true gift wasn't the rest you found, but the awareness you carried with you through it. Upright sleep is a kind of vigil, not against danger, but against forgetfulness. It holds your body in place so that your mind can drift gently, but return easily, never fully submerged, never lost. You rise again, not from a stall this time, but from the cloister bench, and when you stand, the aches come with you. Your hips murmur, your neck clicks faintly, your knees stretch like old leather, but you don't resent the discomfort. It's honest, and it makes you feel more, ... Here, inhabited. There is a quiet nobility in the ache that follows intentional stillness. It tells you that you stayed, that you didn't abandon the moment, that you lived, even in rest. You follow the corridor down toward the refectory, where lunch is being prepared. Another meal, eaten in silence, broken only by the soft scrape of spoon on bowl, and the gentle voice of the reader, who recites aloud from scripture, or a saint's life, while the others eat. You find yourself anticipating the taste of lentils, the crunch of coarse bread, the warmth of a clay mug in your hand. Every sense has been tuned by stillness, and now even these simple pleasures feel heightened. You pass a monk along the hallway, who carries a stack of books bound in faded leather. He doesn't look at you, but his presence is enough to remind you that this place is alive with centuries of wakeful rest. You imagine how many of those books were read in the deep hours, illuminated by beeswax candles, held by hands trembling, with both reverence and fatigue. Books born from minds that learned to write in the half-light, that trusted their upright sleep to sustain their clarity, And as you walk, a thought settles over you like a blessing. Perhaps the real reason monks slept upright was because it trained them for something bigger than rest. It trained them to stay present, to remain in the moment even when it's uncomfortable, to wait without collapsing, to breathe through the ache, to listen. And isn't that what all of us are learning to do, in some way or another? To live upright, to stay still without giving up. You stop at the threshold of the dining hall and glance back down the hallway, toward the chapel where your long night began. It looks different now, not grander, not smaller, just ... truer, and in your bones, in the memory of your spine. You carry its silence with you. You are not just someone who learned about monks. You are someone who sat where they sat. You are someone who slept like they slept. You are someone who stayed upright. Lunch is slow, deliberate, like everything else within these walls. The scent of lentils, garlic, and barley hangs in the air, mingling with the warm dryness of old wood and the faint ghost of candle wax. You sit where you're told, no ceremony, no performance, just the natural ease of a place that knows itself. The room is long and quiet, the only voices rising from a single monk at a wooden lectern who reads aloud from a hagiography written centuries ago. You don't catch every word. Latin floats more than it lands, but the cadence is familiar now, comforting even, like waves that no longer surprise you. As the reader speaks, spoons dip slowly into bowls, bread breaks without sound, and the soft scraping of wooden chairs is the loudest sound anyone makes. You chew, and with each bite, you feel something loosening, not a muscle or a joint, but a rhythm deep within you. This is what life feels like when you live from the inside out. You realize something as you sit there upright, spoon halfway to your mouth. You're not tired, not in the way you expected to be. Not in the way you usually are, after a long night, with too little sleep. You're aware of your body, its aches and stretches, its hunger and slowness, but it feels known to you now. Less like a machine that needs fuel and rest, and more like a landscape you've wandered thoroughly, peak to valley. That long night of upright sleep did not deplete you. It returned you to yourself. There's a clarity that comes from doing less, from moving slower, from closing your eyes not to escape, but to listen. And now, as the final spoonful of lentils disappears from your bowl, you catch yourself smiling, not at a joke, not at a thought. Just at the fullness of this quiet moment. You step outside again after the meal, your body warmed and settled. The sun is high now, gilding the top of every cloister arch in soft gold, and casting perfect leaf shadows across the flagstones. There's no breeze, only the faint hum of bees and the distant trill of a bird nesting somewhere beyond the abbey walls. The day has found its middle, and you, too, find yours, not bustling or striving or worrying, but simply being. The monks return to their work now, copying texts, tending vines, grinding pigment for future manuscripts. Their tasks are not rushed. Each gesture is deliberate, and even the smallest action, a hand brushing dust from a bench, a finger marking a place in a book, feels full of intent. There's no productive morning or lazy afternoon here, no division between work and life. There is just devotion, expressed in different forms. Prayer, labor, silence, rest. You trail a hand along the cool stone as you walk back toward the scriptorium, drawn by something quiet and old. Inside, the light falls in slanted stripes across long tables, and monks hunch silently over parchment. A few glance up as you enter, but only briefly. They are busy living in the moment, transcribing not just words, but meaning. The scent of vellum and ink is surprisingly sweet, and the air is thick with stillness, but not the kind that stifles. It's a stillness that breathes, that allows you to settle without sinking. You stand at one empty desk, and glance down at the tools of the trade. Goosequill, inkwell, knife for scraping mistakes, pounce for smoothing parchment. Even the mistakes have their own tools here, their own rituals. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is thrown away. Even imperfection is part of the practice. And suddenly you remember a fringe anecdote. You once read a scholar's half-forgotten footnote about a monk who claimed that upright sleep made him a better scribe. He wrote straighter lines after vigils, he said. His letters were more patient, more graceful. The body does not sleep, he wrote in the margin of a psalm, but the spirit learns to wait. Historians still argue whether he meant it as a metaphor for discipline, or as a literal side effect of vertical repose. You like to believe both are true, because you've felt it now. The way upright sleep teaches patience not by force, but by rhythm, the way it reshapes your sense of urgency, the way it invites your soul to keep company with your breath. You leave the scriptorium quietly and return to the chapel. No service is happening now, just the sun pouring in through the windows, dust floating like slow confetti in the air. You sit again in the same stall as before, your misericord waiting beneath you like a secret you've already been told. And you close your eyes, not to nap, not to withdraw, but to listen. You're beginning to understand what the monks meant when they said, "Silence is a teacher." You hear it now, not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace, and so you sit. Not for show, not for discipline, not even for the sake of understanding, but simply because it feels right, upright again, eyes closed, breath slow, the kind of rest that doesn't need softness to be real, the kind of rest that knows how to hold you steady without laying you down. You wonder how many people in the world right now are sleeping in the old way, upright, intentionally, in monasteries, temples, deserts, forests, on long trains, on quiet porches, in small corners of chaotic cities. You think of them and feel less alone, because now you know the shape of that sleep. You've lived inside it, and it's no longer strange to you. It's simply a different way to be whole. You stay seated in the chapel, your back upright and calm, not because of obligation now, not because of ritual or rule, but because the posture feels, earned, familiar, like a friend who no longer needs to be introduced. The misericord presses gently beneath your thighs, offering just enough support to carry your weight, but not enough to let you forget it. That's the point, after all. To remain aware. To remember that rest and awareness aren't enemies. That you don't have to collapse in order to let go. You breathe in, and the air feels both ancient and new. The scent of wax, wood, and stone folds into your lungs like an old melody hummed from somewhere inside memory. A monk moves past in silence, brushing the edge of your vision like wind. He doesn't look at you, but his presence is a kind of benediction. You are not a visitor now. You are a listener in the great stillness. A thought returns to you, something a novice once whispered centuries ago. In a dusty account, sitting upright, I learned to hear my own heartbeat again. Historians still argue whether this was meant as metaphor or medical report, but again, the truth feels bigger than either. You felt it. Through the long hours of last night, through the rituals of wakefulness, through the humming quiet of this entire monastic day. You've heard something you hadn't realized was missing. The rhythm of stillness. The voice beneath all voices. Not dramatic, not mystical, just gently present. Upright sleep, it turns out, isn't about conquering restlessness. It's about tuning into it until it no longer demands a response. You let the unease exist without chasing it away, and eventually, it softens. Like a bell after the strike. You open your eyes, and the chapel has not changed, but your way of seeing it has. The worn edges of stone, the pattern of sunlight on the floor, the delicate curves of a candle holder, they all seem to breathe with a kind of gentle awareness. Nothing here is ornamental, nothing wasted. You think about the craftsmen who carved those misericords beneath the choir stalls, those small, often hidden sculptures tucked where only the resting monk would feel them. Sometimes they were animals, sometimes faces, leaves, or mythical beasts, small jokes maybe, or reminders that even in stillness, there is wonder. That rest doesn't mean numbness, it means alertness with the volume turned low. You lean forward slightly, not in fatigue, but in recognition. This moment is the kind of sleep you carry forward into waking. The kind that teaches you to sit through discomfort and hear what's behind it. You think of how far you've come across centuries of stories, across seas of silence, across a single night spent in a wooden stall. You haven't simply learned about monks. You've lived, for a little while, inside their posture, their rhythm, their way of being, and it has changed you, not with drama, but with the same quiet confidence that carries them through every vigil. When the bell sounds against this time not to wake, not to pray, but to signal the end of the midday quiet. It feels less like a command and more like a breath. You rise, slowly, upright still. Your spine knows this shape now. It knows the difference between rest and collapse, between stillness and sleep. You walk without hurry, because there is no hurry. There never was, only the pace of the breath, the body, and the bell. And now, before we part ways, you take one last look at the stall, the place you sat, and drifted, and returned. The place where you learned that silence is not empty, and uprightness is not rigid, where sleep does not mean escape but presence, and you smile, just slightly. Because somehow, the night you spent sitting up has left you more grounded than any mattress ever could. You step out into the cloister, and the sunlight greets you like an old friend. The bees have returned to their slow work. The leaves rustle softly. Somewhere nearby, a page is turned. You carry the silence with you. You carry the stillness with you. And you carry yourself not slouched, not rushed, but upright. Exactly as your wind dashed down 300 words, and now, as our time together gently folds to a close, let yourself sink not into thought, not into effort, but into breath. There's no need to hold anything anymore. The bells have quieted, the footsteps faded, and all that remains is the soft hum of stillness echoing through the memory of this long, beautiful night. Let your spine relax now, like a tree at dusk, still standing but softened by the dark. Your arms once folded neatly across your lap, now loosen beside you. Your breath deepens without trying, without pulling. Just a rhythm your body remembers, like a lullaby sung from the inside out. You are safe here. You are held not by walls, not by stone, but by the quiet you've carried within. The monks have returned to their rituals. The candles have burned low. The pages are closed for the day. And you have earned your rest. Let the stillness wrap around you now, not as silence, but as presence. Let it warm the corners of your thoughts like morning sun slipping across a wooden floor. Let it fill the space where noise once lived. There is nothing left to do. Nowhere left to go. Only this breath. Only this moment. Only sleep. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.